right, everyone. Good morning and welcome to our topic today and our webinar about navigating blended family situations during COVID-19. We know that this has just been a very chaotic time for all families. So we're glad that you're here and that you're joining us today. We want to start off by saying a big thank you to our colleagues Stephanie and Stephen for helping navigate the technology. This webinar is going to be recorded and will be on our YouTube page as well. So Stephanie, if you could go ahead and start recording, that would be great. All right. Well, again, thank you everyone for being here today. My name is Amy Escott. I help direct the Missouri Academy of Child Trauma Studies, which is the training arm of Children's Advocacy Services of Greater St. Louis at the University of Missouri St. Louis. And we are so thrilled today to have two of my colleagues, Kiara Charles and Alejandra Martinez, who will be sharing their wisdom about all of the ways that COVID-19 presents parenting challenges, particularly for parents and families where children might go between more than one house or intergenerational families or all sorts of other scenarios, because we know that there are some sort of unique issues around the coronavirus and the global pandemic that present for these families. So our hope today is that you all will be able to come away with some ideas and skills. And we know we have lots of expertise of those that are also participating in the webinar. So we will have some time at the end for questions as well. The other piece that I just want to acknowledge is we know that everyone here is living and working also in the global pandemic, and we hope that you all do whatever you need to do to keep yourselves well. So the webinar is going to be recorded. So if you are not feeling sitting in front of Zoom today and want to watch it later, we totally understand and won't be offended. Also, I know most of the cameras are off, but if somehow a child or pet or someone else in your home makes an appearance, that is all welcome. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Alejandra and Kiara and let them introduce themselves.
Thank you, Amy, for having us and being able to share with us some of this time to get in touch with our fellow service providers. So my name is Alejandra Martinez. As Amy said, I am a licensed master social worker at the CAC. I provide individual long-term therapeutic services for children in the St. Louis area. So I'm able to do trauma-focused work with them. In addition to that, I also co-facilitate with Kiara a parenting group specifically around how can we support caregivers who are caregiving children who have experienced trauma. A personal interest of mine is working with communities that might have unique challenges. So I am a bilingual therapist and I really enjoy working with immigrant populations, but I'm just so thrilled to be here.
And my name is Kiara Charles, and I am a provisionally licensed counselor at the Children's Advocacy Services. I also provide long-term trauma therapy to children, and as well as Alejandra stated, we also facilitate a group called TASK, which focuses on helping our caregivers build trauma-informed parenting skills. We also go out into the schools and facilitate a group there as well. And so I also support children and caregivers in the St. Louis area, providing trauma-focused services. I'm so happy to be here this morning, and thank you to everybody who's here to attend.
Great. So today, before we get started, just want to lay out what our agenda is going to look like and the topics that we're going to cover. So as Amy said, for us, it's really important to be able to discuss blended family systems, especially during this time, because we are noticing that they're having unique issues come up for them as they navigate those systems. So we'll be talking about what some of those unique impacts are during COVID, and then we'll be going into how can we support you all to adapt to this new world in supporting those families, and then how can you as service providers be able to offer up more support to caregivers to bolster skills that they may already have or that they may be in need of. So really trying to equip them being able to navigate these systems themselves as well. So kind of having a twofold approach of how can we support service providers and how can we support caregivers even more. So before getting started, let's just, oh, I feel like I've got stuck on a slide there. Let's just get a little quick definition of what we're talking about. So usually when we talk about blended families, we're typically referring to traditionally families that involve step family members. So step parents, step siblings. This is kind of the traditional idea of a blended family. But for today's purposes, we really are thinking about this in a more broad perspective. So really trying to include all the family systems that we know exist in abundance in our communities that involve multiple layers. So for example, co-parenting between parents who are no longer together. And this includes biological parents, adoptive parents, relative caregivers even, where the co-parenting responsibilities really are spread across different households. We're also including and keeping in mind foster families, where we've got caregivers that are foster parents, but we also have biological parent involvement through visitation, through other ways of involvement. And we've even got caseworkers providing some of this interaction as well. We're keeping in mind multi-generational households. So folks who've got grandparents, potentially uncles or aunts living in the same home, where the decision making then really comes down to a group of adults versus the more traditional 2-unit family. And then we're also even including in this system the idea of relatives who provide daily childcare for families. And we know that this is very common right now during COVID for parents who have experienced increased work, and they're relying heavily on relatives for childcare due to school closures and closures to other resources that they might have previously used for childcare. So all of these different dynamics we're keeping in mind as we talk about blended family systems for today.
So as Alejandra mentioned, we definitely are going to be talking about blended family systems, which is a more eclectic type of family system that comes along with some unique concerns. Now that we are dealing with COVID-19, that adds another layer of complexity, right? And so we definitely wanted to highlight what we are seeing become some of those unique stressors that are impacting our blended family systems. So in regard to health risk, as Amy mentioned earlier, we have our kiddos who are visiting with one caregiver at one point during the week, and then they go and visit that other caregiver. And that back and forth, as we know, based on what we've learned about COVID-19, is not exactly, advised, from a medical approach, but it is the way that our blended family systems are often set up, and it is the arrangements that they already have in place. And so that's something that we're seeing become more of a conversation right now. Also talking about these multiple caregivers that are living in the home, or perhaps they're living outside of the home, but they're definitely the hands on deck when it comes down to child rearing. And so, of course, we understand that, those multiple interaction also poses its own health risk, especially when we're talking about these multi-generational households, where we may have individuals in different age ranges who may have specific health concerns that then kind of complicate and color this picture even more for our blended family systems. And then just in general, these different approaches to safety. So these ideas about hygiene, these opinions about whether to wear a mask or not to wear a mask when you go out. So of course, we're getting multiple people together from multiple perspectives, and that can also pose some health concerns for our blended family systems. In addition to that, of course, financial strain right now is a big conversation for everybody being impacted by COVID, but specifically for our blended family systems who may have multiple people living in the house at one time. We are hearing more and more that, hey, we're running low on food because all of the kids, they're sitting at home all day and they just want a snack, So there's a lot of traffic in the houses right now. And so those essential supplies that we want to make sure that our blended family systems have may be dwindling down quicker than normal. And so of course, this is going to increase some of that strain within the family system as well. Now, to talk about these magnified relationship dynamics, we understand that our families don't exist in a vacuum. So there are some historical relationship factors. There are some things that are impacting them that perhaps were brewing under the surface at first, but based on all of the stress that's come along with COVID, as well as these family systems having to come together and communicate even more, we're seeing more of those relationship dynamics kind of come out. Right. And so now they don't have as much opportunity to just avoid each other or to sweep things under the rug. Now these things have to be discussed. And then that's when we're seeing more of that conflict happen. And some of that poor communication is happening as well. And so then also this intrafamilial decision making. So perhaps in other households where you have one parent and the other parent and they just kind of make a decision together about childcare. When we talk about our blended family systems, we have multiple team players who all have valuable opinions and they all have, good input, and we want to hear from them all. But of course, this can also contribute to some of that intrafamilial conflict, especially because those external resources that they may have relied on in the beginning for support, perhaps that has minimized or that's dwindled down some. And so now there's more of that in-group decision making having to be made. And that's where we're seeing some increases in conflict and stress as well. And so we really did want to highlight the fact that as service providers, as helping professionals, we too are being faced with some unique stressors when, both professionally and personally. But from a professional scope, I think that what we've realized at CASGSL is that this is kind of pulling on us for some new tools, some new resources, and maybe not completely revamped, but definitely approaching the work in a different way that best suits this situation that we have right now, that is COVID-19. It's something that we've never quite seen before. And so we definitely wanted to provide service professionals from all different disciplines and professional backgrounds with some ideas about how to be approaching the work right now during this very complicated time. And so something that we really wanted to start off with is really encouraging you all. We understand that as helping professionals, we want to help. That's our genuine inkling. It's something that we do on a day-to-day. So oftentimes we feel pressured to sort of have the answers and just to know what to do. And so we really did want to start off with validating that for us all, and also encouraging you to kind of resist some of that temptation to sort of get ahead of yourself. Because we really do have to acknowledge that there is new updates about COVID every day. There's so much that we don't know. And we have to acknowledge the fact that we really genuinely don't know. And so we wanted to provide a reflection exercise that could be helpful for anybody, like I said, regardless of your professional background. And this is the idea of not having to reinvent the whole wheel. So one, we don't really have the time for that. And two, we don't quite have enough information or the tools to be able to do that. And so this is a reflection exercise that has really helped me and my colleagues in sort of grounding ourselves and kind of prepping ourselves for the decision making and the problem solving processes that we have to do in our day-to-day work. And so I did an adaptation of this reflection exercise that is specific to my background as a child trauma therapist. So we're going to go on to the next slide here, and I'm going to walk you through sort of how I was able to adapt this for myself. And of course, I encourage you to adapt it based on your framework. And so in thinking about COVID-19, what do I know already? I know that COVID is unpredictable. I know that it is disrupting whatever systems or routines that my families had in place. And also as a child trauma therapist, what I know about trauma is that unpredictability can definitely increase trauma reactions. It sends a signal of danger that says, whoa, what's going on here? I need some consistency in my life. And so that's just what I know off top, right? And so then thinking about, well, what is my role in this? My role has been always, even before COVID, to help my children decrease traumatic stress symptoms, as well as to help my caregivers help and coach our kiddos impacted by trauma through that process of recovery. And so that's my role here, as well as always working on enhancing safety. So now that I've kind of identified that and I've been able to link it to, okay, we got this unpredictability here that's happening that's likely going to increase traumatic stress symptoms. Boom, as a child trauma therapist, I need to be focusing on decreasing those traumatic stress symptoms. And then in addition to that, now shifting my focus to, well, what tools does my family that I'm working with already have? What do they already know? And so perhaps we've done some work together already, and we've sort of laid that foundation of talking through coping strategies, ways to relax your body, ways to think in a more adaptive way that decreases stress levels, and also talking about those safety concerns. So can we identify when a kiddo stress level is raising so high to where they may need some more in-depth crisis management? So do my caregivers have those crisis resources on hand? Will they know how to get in touch with, let's say, behavioral health response when they needed to? And so those are some things like, okay, this is what my family is already working with. And then identifying, well, what's the need right now? Well, the need is to try to help them increase some of that predictability as much as they can. How can I help with that as a trauma therapist? Looks like me doing the best that I can to help them establish routines, right? So in the midst of all of this unpredictability and uncertainty, how can I, as their therapist, help them kind of get some structure back into their day? And so, of course, a part of that is me making sure that I'm as consistent as I can be. So me maintaining my appointment time with them, me making sure that I'm touching base how I would have always touched base with them, making sure that I'm accessible to them as much as I can be. So those are going to be some of those things that I can do to try to get towards that concern of this unpredictability increasing their traumatic stress symptoms. And then also just identifying what other supports might I need in order to increase my understanding of how to best serve this family, as well as what are some other ways that they can sort of enhance their understanding as well. So a simple Google that says COVID-19 family schedules can give families some good ideas around how they can be trying to re-implement some of their structure in their lives during this time. So once again, I just want to emphasize that an exercise like this is really to, one, ground us as helping professionals in what we can actually do at this time. What tools do we actually have? As well as is helping us really think through how we can start approaching the work, as well as eventually truly intervening with our families and helping them in a more direct way. And so the next step here is around prioritizing. So I'll say this over and over again. It seems like every day there's a new update about COVID-19, and there's some new information about how it's going to impact all of our lives. Whether or not that information is completely accurate, we don't know all the time either. And so we're always trying to sort of identify what are going to be my top priorities? What are some things that I need to make sure I'm kind of, knocking off my to-do list here, as well as what are some things that are going to provide my families with the relief that they're needing right now? And so, of course, safety is going to be paramount for us all. So we are going to be focused on safety right now. That's going to be a top priority, regardless of wherever anything else goes. And so, of course, physical safety is going to be a big concern for us all. I also want to highlight this psychological safety piece as well, because it's equally as important. And so this idea of psychological safety is going to be around helping our families feel like they're safe, which is a very tough thing during COVID-19. Like I said, there's a lot of scary media attention around this, and we've got social media now, and everybody can get on there and sort of say what they want. So we do want to be working hard to try to sort of soothe the minds of our families and our caregivers as much as we can, as well as our own, right? So really trying to keep that as a priority is going to be very important. Also, talking about explicitly defining the roles. So when we're talking about blended family systems, we've got multiple team players on the court, right? We've got a lot of hands on deck. And so it's going to be important for us as helping professionals to know who all is a part of this family's team. And what about that is important? So when it comes down to prioritizing the work that you're going to do as a helping professional, you kind of want to know, well, who are my key team players here? Who are the people that I do want to be making sure that I touch base with on a week-to-week basis, no matter what? Who are the people that I want to make sure that I'm providing with accurate information, right? And so that's going to really help you prioritize how you're kind of going about your day-to-day, how much time you spend on the phone with one person versus another person, right? And this is just the reality of the work that we do when it comes down to time management. And so explicitly defining who these folks are and what role they play and how that best suits your goals for the family, then that's going to help you prioritize and help you kind of get through your day a little bit smoother and feel more focused and grounded in the work that you're doing. Another piece here, oh, and I want to go back here. So some ways that I've explicitly defined roles have been through genograms or just real quick and simple, like, who's the person that takes care of kiddo on the day to day? Who, when mom's at work, who's the person in charge, right? So I'm really just trying to identify who these folks on the team are. And then assessing capacity. So really trying to figure out, when it comes down to prioritizing what your goals are, what does everybody have the capability to do and to tackle right now? You do want to be trying to get some very manageable concerns up there as much as you can, because that allows you to feel more effective in the work that you're doing. And then it provides your families with that sense of relief that, yeah, things are getting knocked off of this to-do list. We're making some progress. We're not just stagnant, or we're not biting off more than we can chew. So these are going to be some helpful ways during this time to really try to smooth out the work that you're doing with these families. And so problem solving. So I honestly feel like this could be a presentation all on its own, trying to figure out how to approach problem solving with these blended family systems where everybody may have a problem of their own that they want to voice, or perhaps we've agreed on what the problem is, but at the same time, everybody has a different opinion on how we should tackle it. So real quick, something that I've noticed myself and my colleagues doing a lot is trying to get in front of whatever problems could possibly arise. So if you've done some work in the history with a particular family, or just in your professional history in general, perhaps you can anticipate some things that may come up based on a certain family type or whatever their specific stressors are. And so this is going to be a focus on prevention. So the ways that I've sort of done this thus far during COVID-19 is I've actually researched. There's so many articles out here from very professional legal aides who have provided a lot of insight and advice on co-parenting during COVID-19, especially considering that a lot of our court systems have had to alter the way that they provide services in order to be considerate of the serious health concerns around social distancing and things like that. So this is a time where our legal advisors are advising our caregivers to really rely on their interpersonal communication skills and their decision making to be able to navigate a time like this. So I have came across very good and reputable research articles by these legal advisors, and I've just sent them out to caregivers who I know are in these particular co-parenting situations. And so that's prior to them even reporting it to me as a concern. It's just something that I can anticipate may bubble up or may become an issue in the future. And I just sent it out. Hey, I thought about you when I was reading this article. Perhaps it could be relevant to you and your family. not expecting any particular feedback. But I will say that I've been told by several of my caregivers that we've been able to put out a couple of fires just based on that information in those articles. So a couple of tips there have been around increasing video chat sessions with caregivers, instead of going back and forth, now you're just kind of doing that video chat, as well as kind of this bargaining system where, okay, kiddo is going to stay with this caregiver during COVID, but afterwards that other caregiver who didn't get as much access kind of gets that back. Right. So there's just been some nice strategies in those research articles that are just Googleable and accessible to everybody. Now, this last piece here about knowing the approach to problem solving is more so around like that intervention work with these families, right? So you're trying to get in there and figure out, okay, what does this family need in order to solve a particular issue? And so we have the Band-Aid versus the intensive care. And just based on the title, I'm sure you can tell, the Band-Aid is more so this short-term approach to the problem. What does this family need right now? What's the immediate concern? Whereas the intensive care approach is going to be more long-term. We're kind of getting in there and doing some restructuring. Perhaps we're adding new team members. And so just to give some examples about what a Band-Aid approach has looked like in the work that we've done at CASGSL during COVID-19. So for example, a Band-Aid approach was, like I mentioned earlier, where we had two co-parents who typically go and share the custody. So kiddo goes over here at certain times during the week and then comes back. So we've helped those caregivers be able to communicate about that bargaining system. So right now, I'm going to keep kiddo, and y'all will be able to video chat and communicate more often via the computer. And then later, after this is over, you will get a lot of that time back. And so that's just kind of a quick, simple approach. It doesn't completely rewire the whole system. It's just what's necessary right now. And it does provide our families with some sense of how to go about things, as well as increases that predictability about things kind of remaining consistent once all of this has died down some. And so a more intensive care approach during this time, which surprised me a little bit as a child trauma therapist, has been actually having to terminate with some of the clients and some of the families that we work with, just because COVID-19 has brought some other concerns more so to the forefront. And so really just working with these families to say, hey, I'm a team member that really enjoys working with you. Right now, I'm wondering though, if this is a service that you need, or are there other services that are of a higher need? And so that's kind of getting in there and doing some really deep restructuring that does have some long-term impacts. And so I do encourage you all to think about, from your own professional background, what these approaches may look like for you. And so we're going to move forward to talking about specific caregiver skills, but these are supposed to be some ways for us as helping professionals to sort of help us sort through all of this that is COVID-19. So we do hope it was helpful.
Yeah, so as Kiara mentioned, for us, it was really important to kind of start off by providing a framework of how we can approach and reorient ourselves to this new way of functioning. Because not only has COVID impacted our families, and especially our blended families, but it has impacted us as well. And so we are having to reorient and restructure how we approach things. The second half of our talk today really is about some of these more concrete skills that we can be working on with our caregivers to help bolster their own sense of empowerment and confidence in navigating some of these really important issues that we're facing during COVID as a blended family system. So the first thing that I really want to touch on is just fundamental interpersonal skills. Our families right now are going through drastic changes and adaptations to their daily life because of COVID-19. So schools are out for the rest of the semester here in Missouri. That means children are at home, and so they're having to navigate childcare. They're having to navigate that on top of having to work through any kind of work-related concerns, whether that be increased work or decreased work. all of these issues that are impacting all of us are impacting blended families specifically because they have to navigate that as a multi-layered team. So they don't have the luxury of not having these kind of ongoing constant conversations with the partner that they're, or the several people that are in their blended family. So really what we're trying to advocate for in this part is actually teaching them how to advocate and really emphasizing their ability to be a self-advocate and an advocate for their child. So focusing on how do we communicate so that others will listen to us. And again, going back to some of these really fundamental skills around being able to get our objective across. So using assertive language, being really direct around what your needs are. So with a lot of these families, what we'll see is that there are pre-existing dynamics, as Kiara mentioned earlier in our presentation, where there might be power struggles, where there might be differing opinions, where there might just be existing conflict. All of this is still present during COVID, but we have to make it work so that these communications can happen. So using assertive language where you're able to state your needs and also state your boundaries in a way that is assertive without being overbearing. And so we really fall back on things like I statements, right? So taking some of that language around kind of blame and shame and really focusing on, this is how I am thinking, this is how I am feeling, I want to be able to communicate this to you. These kind of basic interpersonal skills are really what we're asking everyone to focus on with their caregivers right now, because more than ever it's truly needed to ensure safety for children. So if we move along, I actually want to talk about a very specific skill that's very dear and near to me. For those of you who are familiar with the world of dialectical behavioral therapy, you may be very familiar with this skill. So this is the Dearman skill, which is taken from the interpersonal effectiveness module of DBT. And really this skill is designed to help people during a time when they're trying to achieve a specific objective, a specific goal, something concrete. And this is a skill that I feel like if you're not currently using with caregivers, I definitely recommend that you make them aware of it and have them try this out in their day-to-day interactions within their blended families. And so I want to quickly kind of go through what that conversation might look like using this skill. So the first step would be simply describing what it is that's going on. And here we really want to stick to the facts. This is not the time to kind of bring up old conflicts, to bring up old arguments or old biases. Really, we're just trying very hard to state plainly what it is that's going on so that we can just open the field of conversation. Only after we're done doing that can we begin to express how we feel about it. So here's where we really use those I statements to emphasize what it is that we're feeling. So this might look like we've explained the situation. We are in a situation in which we have to figure out how we're going to approach social distancing and what that means for us. I feel frustrated that we haven't yet been able to come up to a resolution around that. And I feel uncomfortable when extended relatives are still allowed to come into our children's lives. I would want us to come to a consensus together. So using those I statements. The next piece is really starting to be assertive about what it is that you want, what it is that is needed in that situation, and then also becoming really comfortable with saying no when things aren't something that you're able to compromise on. So we've stated the situation, we've expressed our feelings. Assertiveness might look like simply stating, I am not okay with X person who is still, I don't know, having high risk because of multiple factors, having interactions with their child when they're at your place. Or saying, I really would like for us to all agree that when we go out in public, we wear masks. So assertive is just being direct as opposed to, well, I don't know how I feel about that. I'm not sure, because that kind of leaves wiggle room. And the last piece would be to reinforce or remind the other person what it is that they have to gain from what you're proposing. So it's not just all about what we want as caregivers, but really kind of reminding the other person that they have something at play too, that they have something that they can gain out of what you're proposing. So in this situation, it might look like, and I really think that this will decrease stress for our families. I think that this will make our kiddo feel safe no matter in which home he's in. or I feel like this will decrease conflict. So whatever it is that you feel would really kind of matter to that other person, reminding them of this is a benefit of being able to compromise around this. The last piece of the Dearman technique really focuses on how we approach the first 4 steps. So doing so mindfully, really trying to be aware of our own responses internally to the conversation. So notice if we feel ourselves being pulled into old dynamics. Notice if we feel ourselves getting distracted and pulled away from the point. And really try to stay focused on what you went in to accomplish and keep circling back to that. Many of you might know of the broken record technique, right? So you kind of start to sound a little bit like a broken record because you keep circling back to, no, we came to talk about this. Now is not the time to talk about this old argument or this old conflict that we had. Let's try to figure this out first. We also really want to appear confident in our presentation. So even if we're not feeling super confident, even if we're feeling that the person maybe is not going to be receptive to what we have to say, being able to use our posture, our tone, our facial expressions really does go a long way in being kind of taken seriously and being listened to, because we are exuding this confidence in what we're trying to obtain. The idea of fake it till you make it if you don't feel confident. And then the last piece that I really do want to emphasize that I feel like sometimes gets missed by people is the idea that sometimes we can do all of these things to the best of our ability. We can express how we feel, we can stay objective, we can be mindful of our responses, and still the person might not give us 100% of what it is that we're asking for. Still, that caregiver might not agree to not let that person into the household. And so really the end is about negotiating. And so coming into that conversation with alternate solutions that you feel comfortable with. So you're not backing down. These are alternate solutions that you feel comfortable with, that you would be willing to compromise with. So maybe that person still comes into the home, but they are not allowed to interact with the child, whatever it is that the solution or the compromise might be. So again, I think that this skill is it's very concrete. The acronym is really easy to remember, and it really encompasses all of those interpersonal dynamics or skills rather that we previously talked about around being assertive, using I statements, trying not to just place blame and or shame on the other, but really trying to communicate, to be heard. So I definitely recommend that you all kind of dig deeper on that one if you're not already familiar with it. The other thing that I really wanted to talk about, and Kiara's talked about this a little bit earlier on as well, is that even with all of these skills being bolstered for our caregivers, even if they're, really doing a lot of really great self-advocacy, even if they're doing their very best child advocacy, we're living in a time in which there is just so much uncertainty. And so for blended families, especially because of all of the unique impacts that Kiara outlined earlier, they oftentimes are not able to land on the best case scenario. They oftentimes don't have the privilege or the luxury of being able to stay at home and then not have any interactions with anybody else, to just really kind of be a very nuclear type family. They oftentimes have to kind of take a pick of a bunch of different options that may not be the best. So really our focus isn't trying to get the perfect solution. And I think that oftentimes I've noticed that a lot of folks, both professional and not, have been striving for the best solution that we could do. We can keep people safe if we do X, Y, and Z. Really reminding ourselves that our goals here are instead to focus on how do we enhance safety, how do we take a harm reduction approach, and how do we adapt to this new normal within the specific constraints of each family. So enhancing safety really is going to look like helping families maintain the connections and the access to resources that they previously had access to. And yes, those will look very different now. Many places like ours are, no longer offering those in-person therapeutic services, but now we offer telehealth services. So really kind of helping them understand how those connections can be maintained for the unique resources that they're in need of. Also, safety planning as necessary for that family. So if you're working with a family in which there are true safety concerns within the blended structure, is kind of mapping out what are my alternatives, what are my safety plans should this happen and should this happen, kind of reducing some of that uncertainty and allowing them to feel like I have a plan should X, Y, or Z happen. It's not just like I'm rolling with it and see how it goes. And that can kind of provide some sense of assurance. And the other piece for enhancing safety is really demystifying a lot of this COVID information that is either inaccurate or just confusing. As Kiera mentioned, we get new updates every single day. And sometimes they're very helpful and sometimes they are not as helpful. And so really trying to get at what is it that is causing some of this false distress because of the false information, and demystifying some of that. So for example, I've had several families who expressed fear of going outside at all, believing that COVID is transmittable via just simply the air, so that it's aerolized. And as we all know from health experts, that hasn't proven to be the case as of now. And so really kind of encouraging them to still be able to utilize some safe outdoor activities like going for a safe walk or things like that. So really kind of trying to enhance safety within this structure. And that may look different than how enhancing safety looked before. And then the other piece, like I said, is taking a harm reduction approach. So really trying to teach our caregivers, or remind them rather, because a lot of them are already doing this, but to pick their battles, right? And that, yes, in an ideal world, we would be able to do all of the safety measures that the CDC and the WHO is requiring of us. But for many blended families, because of multiple factors like socioeconomic status, like racial, cultural factors, immigration status, some of those guidelines are a little bit more difficult to follow. So really trying to find, how can I maintain the maximum level of safety within my current lived experience, and taking that approach rather than a lot of kind of pressure to get it perfect. And that last piece is mostly for that emotional well-being. So trying to establish new routines within the family. I've noticed a lot that people are attempting to like recreate what life was like pre-COVID, but now during COVID. And that proves to be very difficult because COVID is impacting us in so many ways that it would be nearly impossible to recreate everything exactly as it was before. So something that I've been doing a lot with my families is working on truly embracing what is it that we can do now in this lived circumstance. What can become new ways of positive interactions, new ways of connection that are not to replace or recreate, but rather to this is just how we want to connect. This is what we want to do with our family now. That way we're not putting, again, a lot of emotional pressure on ourselves to be how things were before. So kind of doing more of that adaptive coping thinking that Kiera mentioned. So all of these really are just to remind us that there sometimes are no super concrete answers, but there are several things that we can do to enhance safety, to increase our own feelings of confidence and being able to make smart, rational, ethical choices. And so really it comes down to this idea of grounding ourselves and grounding our clients so that they're able to do that. And that is really how I kind of guess want to wrap up and leave room for question, is the idea of, and we can switch over to the next slide, of we as working professionals have been just as impacted by this as our families and our blended families. And the way that we interact with each other has been drastically changed. And the way that we're able to serve our clients and families have been adapted. And really the best thing that we can do at this time is be intentional, be thoughtful, really consult with our own ethics. Several of us have different ethics based on our profession. So trying to approach situations from that frame of thinking and be adaptive to all the things that are happening is the most effective way to maintain strong relationships with our families and to maintain healthy relationships in the work that we're doing. So I highly encourage you to consult with your peers, to seek advice, to seek new resources, and really just kind of acknowledge that this is something that we're all going through together, and that we're doing the best that we can at this time. So with that, I want to open it up to any questions that you all may have, or that may have come in while we were speaking.
So thank you, Kira and Ale, for an incredible presentation. I know that one question we had gotten sort of ahead of time, and I think your presentation gave a really nice job of giving a decision framework around this, is any other advice or words of wisdom for families where the other caregiver provider is just not following any of the recommendations? So like maybe taking carloads of other kids to Taco Bell or having lots of people come in and out of the house. Again, I think you gave that a really fantastic framework, but any other thing you would add to that?
Yeah, so it's a great question because we see it happening so often with families right now, right? With blended families, that one caregiver might have a certain way of approaching COVID and another might be drastically different. Not just that, but potentially actually be posing true health risks. So for those conversations, I really think about what Kiera talked about, involving other people that could be able to kind of mitigate some of that. So is there some kind of pre-existing custody arrangement that could be revisited? Is there any way that we could negotiate boundaries that maybe can be lifted as soon as all of this happens? And so I wish that I could give more kind of one size fits all solutions, but as we know, all of these blended families have unique dynamics. So really I would fall back on reaching out to who is on our team and who can provide kind of more, oftentimes even legal support around how we navigate those custodial responsibilities. I don't know, Kira, if you have any thoughts around that.
Yeah. I would also say that something that I've really, because I have several situations like this with some of the families that I work with, and something that's been really beneficial is assisting my caregivers in helping and kind of coaching their kiddos through these self-advocacy skills. And really being able to communicate for themselves, because mind you, this other caregiver who's in disagreement with the way the other caregiver is approaching things, they're not typically there, right? So they're physically separated. So it really is on that kid to develop that skill set to be able to communicate, just like Alejandra did a great job with walking us through some interpersonal skills. Those can be easily translated where that's something that the caregiver can then coach kiddo through. And I've also seen some caregivers, which I was very impressed by, kind of, considering the developmental level of the kiddo, giving them some set responses that they just kind of parrot over and over again. No, that's not okay. That's not safe. Or no, I don't feel comfortable with that. And just kind of going back to that, over and over again. So they don't have so much that they have to remember, but they're always able to communicate. Now, whether or not that caregiver actually takes that feedback and shifts what they're doing, a lot of times that kiddo has no control over. But at least that caregiver may get tired of hearing that kiddo parrot that same statement over and over again. This doesn't feel safe. I don't like this situation. I don't, So that's something else that I really would recommend. It's really a nice opportunity to teach our kiddos some skills that will be useful to them regardless of the context when it comes down to self-advocating for their physical health.
Yeah, I think those are all such good points. So basically really just however parents would have navigated someone else caring for their child in a direction that's different from what they would wish, and just sort of translating that over to sort of this situation. Because I think that can also be helpful for families to remind them that like you've navigated debates over screen time or differences of opinion over how much junk food kids get to eat. And like, this is different because there's more concrete safety concerns. But I think sort of that can also help families feel a little bit more empowered. So what other questions does our audience have today for Kira and Alejandra? You can either pop them into the chat or unmute yourself and ask, or other words of wisdom. I know we have some of our colleagues here from Kids in the Middle who have a lot of expertise in this area as well.
Amy, while people are kind of getting their thoughts together, I did want to talk a little bit more about what really inspired me and Alejandra getting together and really trying to dive deeper into this particular topic. In the work that we do, as Alejandra mentioned, we at CASGSL, we serve children impacted by trauma and their caregivers. And kind of just based on the nature of children with trauma histories, we often come across kiddos who belong to blended family systems based on, like I said, trauma history. So we got that parental separation piece. We also know incarceration rates are high. Alejandra mentioned immigration status. So there are a lot of complicating factors that come along with kind of what causes a family to become blended in the first place sometimes. And so we really felt like during this time of COVID-19, as service providers, we were really feeling a pull. We really were like, man, I want to be more helpful. And we found ourselves feeling helpless a lot of the times. And it was a different type of helplessness than what we typically do experience in the work that we do in general. And we realized, wow, it's this COVID stuff that's going on that's really adding an additional layer to the way that we have to approach the work that we're doing. And so it really brought home for us that likely other helping professionals, like I said, regardless of your particular discipline, are probably feeling that same pull. And so we do hope that a presentation like this gets the conversation started for you all and your colleagues about how is this changing and shifting the way that you're approaching the work, and what pools are you all feeling as well.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. So it looks like we don't have any other questions right now. As a reminder, this is going to be posted on our website, and it has been recorded on YouTube. So we do encourage you to go ahead and share this with any colleagues or families where you think that this might be helpful. Please also reach out to us if there are other topics that sort of a brief webinar would be helpful for you or families in our region as we are all navigating these difficult times. I know we are planning another webinar related to managing loss and grief with families, particularly for our educators, with all the changes at the end of the school year. So that will be coming up, and we will go ahead and communicate that with everyone as we get it scheduled. We also wanted to say a special thank you to our funders, to the Recast Grant, to the St. Louis County Children's Service Fund, the St. Louis City Mental Health Board, and all of our funders, as well as our support for the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, as we are working to meet the community's needs and best care for children and families in our region. So thank you all for being here today, and thank you to Kira and Ale, as well as Stephanie and Stephen for being on our logistics team. And we hope that you all can enjoy some of the